So the idea behind this group, for anyone who doesn't know, is that we wanted to basically create a space where people can learn and share ideas and connect with each other. We know that you're all busy people. It's not always easy to find time for learning and developing. So we wanted this to be practical and bite-sized and allow you to walk away with tools and strategies that you can implement today. I hope that you're all keeping well and safe. I know there's so much going on at the moment, and recently, I suppose, we're thinking of the people in Ukraine. I know there's a lot of worry and uncertainty as well, even for individuals and businesses. And it's something that actually just keeps coming up in conversation. And that is actually something that we're talking about next month, is about those skills to deal with all of that uncertainty, for individuals and for businesses. So Veronica will pop that into the chat actually if you're interested. Our next session will be on the 13th of April. So it's just helping people to manage all of that unpredictability, both for teams and individuals. So that'll be on next month. But for today, my name is Julie O'Sullivan. I'm the head of people development with Jigsaw Better Business. And I'm joined today by Bridget Farrell from All Talk Training. So I'm really looking forward to hearing her insights about how leaders on multicultural teams can improve that inclusivity and productivity and engagement of their team. I'll come to that in a second, but I suppose just general housekeeping at the start. Maybe we can all just stay on mute as I'm chatting to Bridget, just to avoid the background noise. But do absolutely feel free to unmute yourself or put something into the chat if you want to ask any questions or comments. And we want it to be a nice and relaxed environment, so don't be afraid to ask a question or share your experience. And we will have a breakout room later. If you can't go into it, I know that some people might not be able to unmute, so don't worry, you can just stay in the main session. But I suppose part of the point of the group is to allow you to expand your network. So if you can, I'd recommend going into the breakout rooms. As I say, we are recording the session at the moment, so I'll be sharing that afterwards, and I'll also share the slides on LinkedIn. So that's our LinkedIn group. You might want to join that if you haven't already. Again, Veronica will pop the link to that in the chat. So if you can pop your cameras on, it'd be great to get to see you all. Again, feel free to unmute yourself to ask questions or add to the discussion, and do feel free to interact with each other, use the chat function. So today we're talking about creating really inclusive multicultural teams. And I think the reason that that's such an important topic in workplaces is that our workplaces are becoming increasingly multicultural. There's greater globalization, migration, and more remote working opportunities. It's much easier to have a more distributed team. And I know that we have around 350,000 foreign nationals in our workforce at the moment, just in Ireland. And we also have a high percentage of Irish people who have emigrated at some point in their lives, either have returned now or are still working abroad. Actually, out of curiosity, what countries or cultures have all of you worked with? Maybe put it into the chat, what kinds of experiences you have working with different countries or cultures. So you might say something like, oh, I'm Portuguese and I work in Ireland, or maybe you're Irish and you used to work in Germany, whatever it might be. Pop those into the chat just so we can see what kind of experiences people have. And while yeah, so Stuart, yeah, Irish working in Poland through English, brilliant. Let's see what else. While those are coming in, actually, maybe I'll just come to you, Bridget. Maybe can you tell us a little bit about the kinds of work that you do, or the kinds of clients that you usually work with?
Hi, Julie. Thank you, and good morning, everybody. So we usually work with clients both in Ireland and also outside of Ireland. So our business is online, so we're able to deliver, I suppose, to businesses both in Ireland and with export clients also. And so our clients could be, they could have a multicultural team on site, or it could be a distributed team that's made up of many different cultures. It could be a client, for example, in Germany or in the Netherlands who also have a multicultural team, or maybe they're all from Germany or all from the Netherlands, for example, and they are then working, operating internationally, so that they need to be able to communicate with people, outside of their kind of language and culture, and they're doing that through English. So there's a bit of a variety there in terms of what our clients look like exactly, but they all have the same issue, and that is that communication, because of the fact that they're communicating across language and culture, is not as smooth as it could be, and that problems arise from that.
Okay, brilliant. Yeah, that's really interesting. And I can see as well, just even from the chat, there's loads of different countries coming in. So Charlotte saying she's French and living in Dublin, managing an Irish team.
Right.
Colin lived and worked in both China and Singapore. So working with different Asian nationalities. One person is Moldovan, working in Ireland for an American company with colleagues in the US, Spain, and Portugal.
Wow.
So very multicultural.
Great.
Irish working across Europe, clients based in the US and Asia. I'm Algerian, studying in Ireland, working on multinational teams in my PhD. Excellent. So hopefully this will be very relevant to you. And I had colleagues working in Bangalore, India, while I was based in Galway. Yeah, absolutely, Ray. And I'm sure that's, becoming increasingly common. Cameroonian living in Ireland, starting a business. Excellent. So lots of different countries all over the world tuning in, which is brilliant. And, just kind of to go a little bit more specific, have you ever worked, and I think a few people have, maybe just pop in a comment then into the chat. Have you ever worked abroad where you were in the minority, and where was that? So again, it might be similar to what you've just put into the chat. Okay, so we have someone who's Canadian with Caribbean background and have worked with Asian, Arabic speaking, and multicultural teams, both at work and in nonprofit settings. Canada is very multicultural. Yes, absolutely. Excellent. So we've got a lot of different backgrounds there, which is great. And have you ever worked abroad, Bridget?
I have. I've worked. My first experience, I suppose, my first intercultural experience was in Germany. I did or not my, but an Erasmus year there. So I
Mm,
studied in Germany, and it was a huge eye opener for me in terms of, language and culture.
mm,
And it was something that I absolutely adored from the
brilliant.
get-go. And so I spent quite a number of years then between, Ireland and somewhere else, because
Mm,
I always just wanted to be kind of in another culture,
mm.
learning about another culture. So I spent some time in Spain as well, Portugal and Brazil, and then again in Germany. So there's a bit of
Excellent.
a mix.
Yeah, and what would you say would be your main learnings from it?
That any judgment that you make ever about a person can be wrong. It can be
Mm,
right, but stereotypes that we have in our heads about people from specific language, or cultures, very often, they might ring true, but very often they don't.
mm,
And you can never, ever, ever judge somebody by anything like, about where they're from, so to speak.
mm,
And yeah, so I think that just, it always stays with you then. Sometimes you still judge. I mean, I'm doing this all the time. We're doing it professionally now, but we're all human as well. And sometimes you still make snap judgments. But
mm.
the trick is then, having learned to, call them into question.
Yeah,
And that's probably the biggest learning, I suppose.
brilliant. Yeah, that's a really good learning as well to get, that yeah, those stereotypes or those quick judgments, they're natural,
Hmm.
but they're not necessarily helpful. So
No.
yeah, exactly. Yeah. As we were preparing for this session, I was reminded of this scene
I love
from
this.
Modern Family. Yeah. I
Every time
think
I see this, this is exactly it.
yeah, yeah, I'm sure anyone who's, lived in a country where they were the minority, probably has had that experience. So yeah, have you had
Yeah.
people say similar things to you?
Oh, absolutely, all the time. And this is, I suppose, why we're so adamant to, I suppose, help open the conversation around this area, because,
Mm.
you know, we work with a lot of non-native speakers who need to
Yeah.
speak better English for their work.
Mhm.
And very often, you know, their English is actually already, it's already great, but, you know, they might not be perceived, you know, that they have,
Mm.
you know, good skills, because their English is perceived as, you know, non-native, and if
Mm.
it's perceived, sometimes when we hear a non-native speaker speak, we focus more on how they're saying something rather than what they're actually saying, and that's a big problem. And
Okay.
so often non-native speakers, like Sofia Vergara, I'm not sure what her character name is in that show, but as she says, like, do you know how smart I am in my own language, you know, that I'm actually not stupid, I don't want to be overlooked, please don't overlook me. And that's a big
Yeah.
problem in meetings, for example, and just in a multicultural workplace in general.
Mm. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Well, I'd like to get a little bit more kind of participation from everyone again. And so what I'll do is I will just put up these details for Menti. So if everyone here can grab their phone, or if they want to open up a new tab, you can either scan that QR code, or you can go to menti.com and enter the code there. So it's 75454889. So if you hold your phone camera up to that QR code, you should be able to reach it. And I can see a couple of little hearts coming through there. So I can just get a sense of who's joining that to make sure we have a few people there. So I can see, that we have a lot of people who are maybe from different countries or different backgrounds, or are working with people from different countries. And we just want to have a bit of a discussion around that. I'll let just give you another minute just to see. We can see a few people coming in there. That is perfect. Okay. So the code, as I say, it's still up there, the 7545 code. But for everyone who is in that Menti poll, I'd love to hear, what kinds of challenges have you experienced when you're working in a multicultural team? So again, it could be you as someone who's maybe working in an English speaking country, but you're a non-native English speaker, or vice versa. Maybe you are English speaking and you worked in a different country. So I'd be really interested to see, what kinds of challenges have you encountered? I can see the first person there was there in with communication styles. And we'll just see what else people come up with. Okay, language barriers can sometimes cause communication problems. Yeah, absolutely. That makes sense. Cultural differences. Yeah. The way conflict and communication is handled. Yeah, that's something that I've heard quite a lot, because I would do a bit of emotional intelligence training, and that skill of assertiveness is something that really differs from country to country. Like, I remember facilitating the training in Ireland, and people were saying, "Oh yeah, assertiveness, that's a skill I really need to work on, because I'm trying to be everyone's best friend, and I'm not as assertive as I need to be." And then did the same training in Singapore, and we were talking about assertiveness, and one of the participants in the training was Chinese, and she was saying, well, I would think more that the passive worker is the ideal worker, that there isn't really, it wouldn't be as valuable to be assertive. And she was just kind of saying that from her perspective and her experience in the workplace, that same skill was valued very differently in a different culture. Um, so yeah, absolutely. The way conflict communication, a few people kind of mentioning the cultural differences, different styles of communicating, language, ethical differences, different habits or routines. We have, again, cultural differences, habits, personal/professional barrier. Local business etiquette, different from my own, adapting the way we communicate to the market in which we're working, absolutely. Yeah, colloquial language. Yeah, those kind of sayings that might not be obvious initially. Cliques forming based on cultural backgrounds. Yeah, absolutely. I've definitely seen that before. And clashing communication styles. Cultural differences, specifically with male team members finding it difficult to be led by a female. Okay, that's interesting. Yeah, so again, even the difference in kind of perceptions about gender. Okay, that's really interesting. Any kind of ones that surprise you there, Bridget, or are they all ones that have come up for you before?
No, nothing really surprising, I suppose. No, it's often these things that really do cause problems, I suppose.
Yeah, excellent. And so if we go, so it's mostly a lot of them saying the different cultures and languages, but yeah, there's a few interesting ones there.
The ethical
Um,
differences, I think, is great. I mean, that's really
yeah.
we're probably talking across very different cultures there as well,
Mm,
that's very interesting.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Um, and so then if we go on to the next one then, what benefits have you experienced working with multicultural teams? Um, Obviously, yeah, there can be some challenges, but what kinds of benefits or positives have you experienced? So we'll give you a couple of minutes to pop an answer in there. Brilliant. Yeah, first person saying fresh perspectives. So yeah, that you those differences allow you to see things differently. Different perception and viewpoints towards situations. Yeah, different mindsets and perceptions. Absolutely. So a few common themes coming through already. Different
Yeah.
mindset, different experiences and insights being shared. Learn to interact with different cultures. Exactly. Yeah, like learning that. Broadening your own viewpoint. Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, a few people coming in with that 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 idea that if you're faced with a problem and you all look at it the exact same way, you'll probably come up with the same solution. Whereas if you all look at the problem in a different way and you all have different experiences to bring to it, you're probably more likely to find a different solution that might be more effective. Um, you can see another one then, yeah, new perspective, different thinking, being consciously more aware of my own behavior. Yeah, absolutely. Really kind of recognizing, because it's with culture, something we've grown up with. It's that idea that fish don't see water. We're surrounded by something we don't realize, and then once we're out of the water or out of our culture, we kind of notice how we do things. Yeah, being more deliberate and constructive with my language, absolutely, which again can help us regardless of where we go, to really focus on ensuring that we're understanding the other person and that we're being understood. And yeah, learn about new cultures. Exactly. So a lot of really good benefits coming through there as well. So these are brilliant. Excellent. Any ones that you would add to this, Bridget?
I think as well, mindset and perspectives is also something that is mentioned, always something that's mentioned a lot.
Mm,
But skills as well, even though you might have trained the same,
mm,
area in,
yeah.
as your colleagues, but you trained in a different country.
Mm,
Sometimes the ways to approach various problems in that area can be quite different.
mm,
And even just thinking, for example, in medicine, for example, we have a lot of people coming to Ireland to work in the healthcare sector, and sometimes the approach to dealing with cases that they deal with can be quite different because their training was very different and the
mm,
approach in the training was different. So it's not just the actual kind of cultural perspective or professional perspective, but also the actual skills that they bring.
mm,
So it could be good, but it might not fit, and it might not be good.
mm,
But at least it kind of shows that there's another way,
yeah.
because very often if we're trained to do something a certain way, we'll
Mm,
think forever, unless shown otherwise, that is the only way to do it. And it's just
mm,
nice sometimes to see that, oh, there's actually another way to do that, and perhaps we have to see then which is the best way and which one are we going to carry forward, so to speak. So not just mindset and perspectives, but also actual skills.
yeah, it's really interesting. Um, so I'll just stop sharing those for the moment. But yeah, those are really, really good experiences that people were sharing there. But Bridget, I wonder even, so we've talked a little bit about the kinds of challenges and benefits. And when it comes to, say, leading a multicultural team, what would you say would be the most important elements or skills of leadership that would help a person manage a multicultural team?
I think there is a definite requirement for empathy and self-awareness. So you have to be able to put yourself in the shoes of everybody on your team, and regardless of their cultural background. So if you're used to managing a team, for example, from the same cultural background as your own, that would be very different to managing a team, even if there's only one other culture on the team, a person from one other culture. You still have to make that effort to try to understand, first of all, what is it like for them, to work here? What are their motivations? Are they any different? Is their personal situation slightly different? Are they working away from home? Do they have the same, support outside of work? So just to understand, what is it like for this person to work with me? What is it like to work with the colleagues? And what is it like for them to work here in this culture? And to begin to understand what, different elements of that. And then also to really become very aware of how you interact with them, based on what you notice about what it's like for them to be working in that team. Also, to check, do you have any biases against them? Have you any biases, towards someone else in the team? What's the reason for that? Bias, as we, is spoken so much about nowadays, and really rightly so. We really, as leaders, really need to be able to check their biases all the time, and it's no different with multicultural teams. And actually, not as more different, but it's probably even more important or more challenging. There's more to do. There's more biases probably to try to uncover and to be aware of, and then to make sure that you act accordingly. That you don't make decisions without thinking or considering what kind of bias might play a part in the decision if I don't consider it. So I would say empathy is a huge thing. Active listening skills. So listening skills, again, it's spoken about so much nowadays that communicating with people is not just you saying something, but it's listening. But when it comes to listening to people who are communicating with you in an accent that you're not used to hearing, so it could be a non-native accent, or depending on the situation, whether you're a native English speaker or they're a native English speaker. But for example, if you're a native English speaker and you're listening to people communicating with you who are non-natives, you are much more likely to focus on how they're saying it and their accent subconsciously, than what they're actually contributing. And that's so, we hear that quite a lot from trainees for English training, where they say that they might say something in a meeting, that they finally get up the confidence and courage to contribute, and they share their thoughts or their ideas, and they're met with, okay, thanks for that. And then someone else then a few minutes later contributes the very same point, and it's received much more, much more not necessarily positively, but it's understood better, and it's interpreted more time is given to it, because probably the people listening really were able to focus more on the content rather than the accent of the delivery. That's accent bias, and it's nobody's fault. It's actually something, again, that we just do naturally. We tend to understand people better when we're used to their accent, or when their accent is familiar to us. And it's just a slip of the brain, so to speak, that does it. So you just need to bring that into the conscious self. And when someone who is a non-native speaker from another language is speaking to you, then that you really have to focus on what are they saying to me? What's their intent? What are their ideas? And also help them to tell you. So, for example, sometimes people might feel bad asking a non-native speaker to repeat something, because they don't want to offend them. They don't want to make it seem like they didn't communicate well. If they didn't communicate well, there's a respectful way to find out what they really meant. Go back and ask them, so do you mean XYZ? You don't have to say, I didn't understand the word you said, let's move on to the, of course you're not going to do that. But equally, don't say thank you very much and move on, even if you didn't understand. If you didn't understand, go back and ask. It's so important. So that's really part of, checking your bias, but also active listening skills. Part of that is also, a non-native speaker might use an incorrect word. They might confuse a word. It happens, if you're communicating in a non-native language. And if you as the listener detect something weird about the sentence or that they said, or you said, oh God, I think, something isn't right there and I don't really understand. Again, even if they've made a mistake, respectfully go back and check with them, is this what you meant? Just whatever you do, don't let it go unaddressed, because nobody wins in that situation. You don't get their information and they don't get it across to you. So that's very important.
Yeah, so that's really interesting, or good to bear in mind, is that communication, it is that exchange. It's not just presenting information, but also receiving it. And you mentioned empathy as well, and it's something that, like, I was doing a leadership development program recently, and we were talking about empathy, and unfortunately, again, just the way our brains are kind of hardwired, is that it's easier to have empathy for people that are similar to us. And so I suppose that's even, an additional point, is to go not just empathy, but, even trying, I suppose, to find similarities as well, if that'll help you be more empathetic to people.
Absolutely. Well, we're more empathetic towards people who are like ourselves because we can understand their perspective more easily. We don't have to work too hard at that. Whereas if someone is from another cultural background, it's much more difficult to be empathetic towards them because we don't understand the full picture. So we don't understand the cultural influence they have. Or maybe, again, like I said, if you're working with people, maybe you're in your home country and there are other people on the team who are in their home country. And so you can relate to them probably quite easily and quite well. Whereas, somebody who is living abroad, who are living in Ireland and that Ireland is not their home, they could be dealing with a lot of other things that, we might not come into our minds. And imagine, for example, through COVID, the people that were here working in Ireland and, couldn't get home to see their families and things like that. That was a huge drain on them, and I'm sure it would impact them in the workplace as well. And if we don't kind of make an effort to think what is it like for them, then we won't really understand. And I'll share, I think Veronica will share the link for a white paper that we have. It was a study we did last year on the inclusion and engagement of multicultural teams. But of course, part of that is, if we want people to feel included and engaged, we have to be able to understand what it's like for them and be empathetic towards them. And in the white paper, I think there's some points there that will give an insight into this is what it's like for a person from a minority culture to be working on a team where there's a majority culture, and what it's like for a non-native speaker to be working with lots of native speakers. There's a huge disadvantage there. And so, things like that will help to understand what it's like. And also the experience that people here who have had, experience working abroad, that is huge way to build empathy, because if you've been a minority abroad, you'll have some understanding for what that's like. If you have had to try to communicate in a foreign language in the workplace, again, you'll have much more empathy for what that's actually like. So all these experiences feed into that.
Absolutely. Yeah, I read that white paper and it was really interesting, even just to see, the kinds of common challenges that will come up for people. And it probably would be something that, it wouldn't be at the forefront of my mind, but seeing that information can really just remind you, I think, a little bit.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I wanted to ask even the rest of you, everyone in the audience, I'll pop a question just up because I think it's a good one to think about. So, say if you were coming to work in Ireland from abroad, what would be one tip that you would give yourself for dealing with Irish people and Irish companies? So I'll let you have a little think. Yeah, go ahead.
This could be particularly interesting for those who are here, who are not Irish and have moved to Ireland to work here, so to get both the perspective from the Irish people in the room and those who are not.
Exactly. Yeah, yeah. Kind of if you were going back before you moved here, what would you say? Or if you are Irish, what would you tell someone else about? I think it's
Mhm.
a good question. We'll let people have a little think about that one. Um, and you mentioned, Bridget, that you're working remotely, that your business is remote, and
Mhm.
obviously a lot of other companies are doing the same, providing, services or products, and they're dealing a lot with online communication.
Yeah.
What would you say? Is there any additional sort of tips or strategies that, specifically relate to working in an online team or virtual hybrid?
There's actually a lot of benefits to virtual what's the best way, virtual communication, or virtual teams working with each other. There's a lot of benefits because for example, meetings very often now take place on Zoom or
Mm,
Teams, where you can see each other, you can hear each other, but you also have tools that can help with communication that would otherwise be either difficult or exclusive, exclude others. So,
mm,
for example, non-native speakers, or people, from the minority cultures, or people who are shy, more shy, as well, and that can be kind of related to culture as well. Sometimes they might be more likely to contribute anonymously. So it could be through Mentimeter, for example.
mm,
So if you were doing brainstorming, people from certain cultures might be very reluctant to give their input. Um, uh, Otherwise, or even like I said again, if it's a non-native speaker, they might not be confident enough to put forward to actually speak their thoughts and ideas. So if they have an opportunity to write, they're much more likely to contribute. Generally,
mm,
in most cases that would be the case. So there's Mentimeter where they can contribute anonymously. There's the chat in Zoom, there's chat in Teams, or other communication tools that they can also write in on Zoom. And I think in Teams as well, you can also have captions. I mean, come
mm.
on, like that's the best thing ever. It's like not only am I trying to understand you speaking, by listening, but I also have the extra aid of having captions here, which makes it just much more likely. I mean, you can't have that in real life, so to speak, in person.
Yeah.
So that's a huge benefit. Um, so there's a lot of advantages to that. The thing that would be dangerous, but that's really the same for not just a minority culture, but that do they go under the radar? Are they not uh, um, able to network, for example, internally, so that that they don't miss out on opportunities.
Mm,
Now, for the people in minority cultures, that's the case whether it's online, whether it's in an office or in a remote company. But I suppose in a way, the field is perhaps a little bit more level now, because people who are working from home, whether they're from the majority or minority culture, can also suffer from that, I suppose, and could also go under the radar too. So so there's benefits, in some ways, to actually, communicating online rather than in person.
absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. That's a good point, actually, that you can make use of the technology. Yeah.
Do absolutely, yeah.
Yeah. There's a few tips coming in from people. Aoife was saying Irish people speak really fast, and there's a lot of colloquialisms, even depending on the county. Yeah, absolutely. Even within the one county, there might be
Absolutely.
a load of different accents. And yeah, Stuart saying Irish people have a dark sense of humor. And also when Irish people say your man, they don't mean a man I own, so plenty of those kind of colloquialisms. And Francis is saying Irish are a friendly sort. So if you don't understand them the first time, ask if they can repeat. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
That's brilliant. So was there another one that just came in there? Um, yeah, so Ray, you were saying about getting used to small talk to be able to contribute. Also try and be punctual and make eye contact when speaking, and bring humor and small chat to the beginning of meetings. And if you ever find yourself on the end of a lighthearted joke, it is usually that you were accepted. Yeah, that's a good point,
That's nice.
actually, Ray. Yeah, it's that's how we chat with our friends, or be at the end of a joke. It's yeah, hopefully all good natured, yeah.
Can I just pick up on a point there?
Hmm.
That's very interesting. Is Ray, you mentioned, about to try to be punctual, and I would say the same. It's important to be punctual in Ireland, for work. But then is punctual different, for what's the meaning of punctual? What is on time? And in some cultures, on time, for example, is 10 minutes before the time,
Yeah.
so to speak. Sometimes it is actually at the time. And then sometimes, for some people, it could be 20 minutes or half an hour after the time. So it's very interesting, just to, I suppose, just be aware of that if you're communicating with somebody and say, okay, if there's a problem with punctuality, for example, with somebody in the workplace, you might have to spell out what punctual means
Mm,
here,
mm,
or equally, people might be frustrated with you because your punctuality is if it starts at 9, I walk in the door at 9. Whereas for some cultures, you should be sitting down, ready to go 5 minutes before 9, so that at 9, we're already, having the meeting, we're already having the conversation. The small talk is over, maybe, for example. So it's
mm.
just a very, it's an interesting thing because there's different perspectives on that too.
Yeah, and I think that just shows that, again, there's so many things that we all take for granted. Like we might say, oh, well, this is what punctual means, or this is
Hmm.
what friendly means, or this is what, we have meanings for certain words, but
Yeah,
actually, yeah, it could be interpreted
it,
completely
it can be
differently.
interpreted differently, exactly.
Yeah, and then Steve just had one more comment, and it's one that I've heard quite a bit as well, is definitely friendly and indirect generally in language
Yeah.
too, and that indirectness can be hard to decipher sometimes.
Yes,
Definitely come
absolutely. Big
across people
problem.
saying that. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
It's the number one thing that I would say to people coming to Ireland
Mm,
is that be prepared or understand that we communicate in a very indirect manner.
mm,
Now, again, relatively maybe not, depending on where the person comes from.
yeah.
But generally, for many of the cultures that we would have working in Ireland, we would be very indirect.
Mm,
And, especially if you're, it's like people coming here, for example, from the US might, say, God, you're very indirect. Why don't you just say it how it
say
is?
what you mean.
So
Yeah,
even within the same language, there can be differences there. It's a cultural
yeah.
difference. It's not a language difference. It's culture.
Mm, absolutely.
But it's easier for a person from the US, for example, to detect that
Mm,
difference because it's the same language. So
yeah,
they might still struggle with it at the beginning, but they'll detect it faster.
yeah.
Whereas for non-native speakers, it would be something quite difficult to detect in the first place, and they'll probably just be confused for some time, depending on whether it has been pointed out to them before or not.
Yeah.
But if they're left to their own devices, it could be quite difficult to detect in the first place. And then once it's detected, at least then they can begin to try to decipher it. But that
Mm,
is a huge task as well, So it's a big thing, I would say. A tip for someone coming to Ireland: be
yeah.
aware of that.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. So that's great. Those are some really good tips that came in there in the chat. And Bridget, yeah, we've been talking about, the different tips and strategies. And I know that you came up with these few as being kind of main ones. So it's sharing the responsibility for successful communication, understand the perspectives, especially of the minority cultures, check your bias and remind yourself that everyone has some form of bias. Your brain is always trying to take those shortcuts.
Mm.
Develop your active listening skills. Again, really, checking your understanding and curiosity. I think that's a really valuable skill. That curiosity alongside the empathy will help you to check your biases and to be listening to people. And these tips are something that we're going to share with you afterwards. So this will be a resource that you have. Bridget's kindly put together a really great sort of checklist, and it's goes into these in a bit more detail, which is brilliant. But uh, I suppose, Bridget, do you want to add anything to these, or any kind of comments on that there?
I would, because these are big things. These are big
Yeah.
shifts that have to happen on a team. Sharing the responsibility for communication, for example, is something that has to become the culture in a multicultural team. And what I mean by that, I suppose, is sharing the responsibility is very, very often. So we're talking about the situation where we have a multicultural team where there is a main language, and let's, for the Irish context, suppose that's English. And then people in minority cultures generally are non-native speakers. And so this is the type of situation I'm talking about. It's so important to share the responsibility for communication here, because up to now, you know, in very often the attitude has been, well, you're the non-native speaker, so you need to sort it out. You need to improve your English, you need to get on par with us. It's so unhelpful and it's so inefficient to approach the communication problem in that way, because it can take someone a really long time to get to a level where they're on par with you. It can take 10 years. It's not something that can be done in 3 months or 6 months. So if you share the responsibility for successful communication, i.e. communication that, where you have fewer misunderstandings, then the best way to approach that is to share that responsibility. And not only does it lead to a more productive team, but much more inclusive also, and that's a very important point here. And with regard to the rest of the points, I spoke about them as well, already. But these are all, again, things that you need to do with the bigger picture, to create kind of a culture around these. But also there's some things that you can really just start doing, like when you leave the meeting today. So for example, if you're speaking with someone from a different language background, don't say, do you understand? So when you're given instructions, don't finish your instructions with, do you understand? Because very likely they're going to automatically, think, oh, I don't want to lose face here. I don't want to look bad. I think I kind of did get them. So they just, whoop, yes, and the yes comes out and you're like, okay, that's fine. And that's fine. And everybody goes away and think that communication was successful, until the other person goes away and carries out the task not as it should be, because they didn't really understand. They were too afraid to ask. And then, it's just a waste of time, and it builds frustration. And then the person who was given the instructions thinks, well, they're not very good at their job. They might be very good at their job, but again, they just feel the pressure to understand, because that's the environment that's there. So instead of saying, do you understand? Ask questions that help them to show that they have. So for example, if you say, the report is due by 4 p.m. today, can you send it to me via email? Do you understand? Yes. Okay, so you go, instead of saying, do you understand, say, what do you need to do? I need to write a report. What time is it due? 4 p.m. today. So you're getting the information relayed back to you, so you know for sure that there was successful communication there. And you can go away quite confidently that, okay, they're okay, they understand now. And again, it allows the other person to the next time they're more likely to actually say, no, I didn't quite get, what time you said. Could you tell me what time is the deadline? So it kind of creates this two-way thing, rather than I'm giving instructions and you should understand the first time. So that's one thing. The other thing, and it's connected to the indirect communication, try to say what you mean and mean what you say. So, for example, giving feedback to somebody from a different cultural background, you might, in Ireland, we tend to sandwich our feedback, and even I was watching this on Dancing with the Stars, at the weekend, that for somebody who's been eliminated, they totally sandwich it. You were amazing, and this was great, and that was great. You could have done this better, but then this was great, and that was great. So we do that a lot. For people who are listening to you, it's they're not when it's not their native language, that little piece of what you could improve might get lost in all the sandwiching. And also the way we say it might be, you could improve this. It's not definite enough, so you need to be a bit more direct and say, you are doing a really great job, but by the next time we meet, I would like, to see that you have improved this, this, and this. And if you have any problems, you can speak to me, make it, you can still be direct and be respectful and nice and keep the relationship, but you have to maybe spell it out a little bit more clearly. And also the thing of, oh, we should do lunch sometime. Don't do that with people from other cultures. If you don't mean it, don't say it. I think that's a really big thing. And then the last point, and I won't keep you long, Julie, sorry, I know we're
Perfect.
pushing on
That's
with
great.
time. But the last point is don't take offense easily. So if somebody speaks to you in a direct manner and you think, oh, the cheek of him, try to catch yourself there and say, what was the intent of that communication? Are they a native speaker? Likely it is the fact that they come from a culture where they can say something so direct and it's not taken personally, or it's not offensive. So maybe I should, check there that not to take offense and to continue to work with the person in a pleasant way. And, you'll probably see that that's just the way they communicate. It's very often the case. And that thing of taking offense can, easily across cultures, can really be detrimental to work and relationships, So there are the three things that I would say you can do right now. And then these on the screen are things that need to be worked on longer term, I suppose.
Those are brilliant. Yeah, really, really useful and practical. And I think, yeah, that last point, I suppose the curiosity kind of feeds into that,
Absolutely.
Going, okay, I wonder why they said it that way when I wouldn't have said that, because that can be for anyone. It doesn't even have to be someone who's, their language is different to you.
Absolutely,
it might just be the way they see the world is different to you, and then they choose to communicate differently,
That's
and
right.
I think that's a really good point, is just going, okay, that's not how I would say it, but they've said it that way and that's fine. It's different, but it's really interesting. I was thinking that we could just pop people into a quick little breakout room and just have a little discussion about it. So just from those tips, from all that Bridget was saying in terms of the stuff you can put in straight away or the stuff that you might want to work on over time, what kind of tips are you most interested in? Are there any that surprise you? Any that you're thinking, yeah, I'll definitely put that in today or tomorrow. I really want to try that. So we'll pop you into breakout rooms again just for 5 minutes, and we'll put about, if you can't join the breakout room, that's fine. You could just stay in the main session, but we can put you in groups of about 6, and we'll just open those breakout rooms now shortly. Okay. So you should see that in front of you to join if you want to. If you're not able to, that's all right. But I suppose, as we say, the kind of purpose of the route of the space is that it's good to get to meet people, have a bit of a chat. So if you can, then feel free to join those. And then, so for anyone who is still in the main session, maybe you're not able to unmute yourself, but would anyone like to pop into the chat? Any tips that you think, oh, that's one that I really want to try? Any tips that surprise you? Any ones you're most interested in? Feel free to pop into the chat if you're not able to unmute.
I can start because it was very funny what I was in the room with Irina Stewart and Ray, and we're talking. Irina just finished how she was saying that sometimes when people talk to non-native speakers, they just much louder and much slower and make us feel like stupid. And it was a very funny story. I had the same, like I'm here 19 years and I was driving maybe for 15 years and I pulled beside the road and I asked a lady for directions, and she was an older lady and she was like very slow, and at the end she told me like, and make sure you stay to the left. Like, driving here for 15 years. I'm like, okay, thanks.
Oh God, yeah, you're like, thanks for that. Yeah.
I couldn't see who was contributing there. Sorry, who was that?
Irina was saying something similar, and it reminds me, refresh that story in my head, because that happened to me, because like I'm Polish, so we drive on the other side, but I'm driving here for 15 years, and this lady was like so loud and so slow, and I'm like, yeah, thanks.
Oh God, yeah.
This is a very good point, because part of communicating well and sharing the responsibility of communicating well with each other is learning to speak plain English, or global English, or Globish. There's lots of different ways you can refer to it, but basically it's a version of English that is more understandable by everybody. And it's not speaking louder and slower, maybe a little bit, but it's not what was just described now. It's simple also, but it's more than that, and it's more effective, so and less offensive.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
and you know what? Like, I'm not an Irish speaker, and I'm in partnership with Irish persons. So I think also another point to keep in mind is, if somebody doesn't understand you, don't repeat the same words. You have to explain with using different words, because repeating something the same word 3 times doesn't make situation better.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we definitely had that, and I've had that in kind of experiences when I was on holidays, of just the same thing being said again. It's like, I still don't understand, I just wanted to pop up, because I know it's coming close to 12, so I just wanted to let people know about next month, and Veronica might pop the Eventbrite link into the chat again. But this, as we mentioned, there's just so much uncertainty for individuals and businesses right now, and next month, again, this is just a topic that keeps coming up. It's about building resilient people and resilient teams, so that you feel better equipped to deal with all the stress and navigate all the uncertainty. So that'll be on the 13th of April, if you'd like to register for that. And if you would like to keep in touch, because we're going to be running these regular events, and it's focusing on the people, the process, the how we do things, and and who's doing it. So it's a good space for making that time for a bit of professional development. So you can join our LinkedIn group, you can follow us on LinkedIn, or follow us on Eventbrite, or join the mailing list. So I suppose we'll hang on for another few minutes, just if anyone has any more questions or comments, or wants to kind of continue the conversation. But if anyone has to drop off now, I'll understand that. So thank you very much for joining us, and hope to see you then at future sessions. So thanks. Brilliant. I can see a few nice comments coming in. Few people might need to drop off, but I suppose, even, was anyone in the second group, or anyone had any other conversations coming up there, or anything like that they'd like to share?